How these papers have been placed in sequence will be made manifest in the reading of them. All needless matters have been eliminated so that a history almost at variance with the possibilities of later-day belief may stand forth as simple fact. There is throughout no statement of past things wherein memory may err, for all records chosen are exactly contemporary, given from the standpoints and within the range of knowledge of those who made them. Welcome, my friends, to the Dracula Podcast. The epigraph you just heard me read is the beginning of one of the greatest stories ever written, Dracula by Bram Stoker, published in 1897. Hi, I'm Frank Stella, and I'm so glad to be joining you here for the Dracula Podcast. We're going to be having a lot of great discussions. What we're going to be doing is analytically comparing and critically contrasting Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula to the NBC drama this season of that same name. Where should we begin here? We just watched episode 1, not called Pilot. This episode is called The Blood is the Life, and that's a very important quote that appeared in the book. Also, of course, it appears in the Old Testament biblical law. Leviticus 17:14 says, "Because the life of every creature is its blood. That is why I've said to the Israelites, you must not eat the blood of any creature, because the life of every creature is its blood. Anyone who eats it must be cut off." And that law is repeated in Deuteronomy, which is the second giving of the Levitical law. Deuteronomy 12:23 says, "Be sure you do not eat the blood, because the blood is the life, and you must not eat the life with the meat." So apparently God is not too big on drinking blood, which is good, because that's not something that I want to do. But maybe maybe that lends an interesting theory about why Dracula does something, or vampires do something that's against God. So, interesting tidbit there. Well, the show opens with Romania, 1881, and you see a couple guys going down into this tomb and opening it up. And of course, one of the guys finds this gold and says, "Hey, look, we're rich!" And of course, anytime you see somebody thinking they're rich and they're in some kind of archaeological or tomb raid kind of situation, that's always kind of a cliche dead giveaway that person who thinks they're rich is about to die about a minute or so later. That's just the way those things go. Turns out it was Van Helsing, Professor Abraham Van Helsing, who was revitalizing Dracula by spilling that guy's blood into Dracula's gaping wide open dead mouth and reviving him. Really kind of weird why somebody would want to do that, but there's this complicated, relationship between the vampire and the humans that's kind of going on in the show. We'll probably talk more about that later. Well, next thing we see is a young, healthy, strong-looking Dracula, and he's in his new home, Carfax, in London, England, and apparently he is posing as an American. And he is a businessman. He's in business for the energy industry. He's got some system. I guess his science team created a way to light up a light bulb wirelessly, and I guess therefore you could kind of transfer electricity to any electronic device wirelessly. So very cool. He needs a cooling patent, and so he ends up getting that. We'll talk more about that as we progress through the episode. But point being, he's got this high-class party, and he wants to showcase his new technology to all these high-class business people and really kind of show off, which is interesting. And of course, he's got this. One of the first people that you see with him is his assistant Renfield, and Renfield seems to be the Alfred to his Batman, if you will. He's kind of in the know on all of Dracula's secrets and everything, his agenda, everything that he's up to. And also Dracula's taken on the name Alexander Grayson. So apparently he doesn't want to go by the name Dracula. Maybe that's a name that people would be familiar with. So no Dracula for Alexander Grayson. One thing that I noticed about Renfield, it's kind of the elephant in the room. Renfield is, he's, how you say,
black.
Yeah, that's something that kind of stood out to me. I don't bring this up to stir the racism pot, but unfortunately in later Victorian culture, blacks were unfortunately kind of socially discriminated against, and this had to do with I don't know what they call racist science or scientific racism, whatever the case is, whatever it's technically called. Apparently, the scientists of that time had determined that blacks were less intelligent than white people, the white folks, or at least less capable of intelligence based on either the size of their brains or the shape of their skulls. Comparatively, I'm not really sure how they came up with those conclusions, but that's the way it was, and so unfortunately, you would not have had a black person really within the sight of any of those high-class party-goers. He would have been out of sight long before any of the guests had arrived. He certainly would not have had a public speaking role. So again, I don't bring this up to stir the racist pot, but that's just the way it was then, and so I'm not sure if the show just didn't do their research or they just decided to disregard it and think to themselves, well, we better have a black person on the show just to kind of round things out. Whatever they were thinking, that's something that I noticed, and so that's just kind of a side note there. Well, Dracula, or Alexander Grayson, says to one of the British business people, I'd like to acquire some of your patents or kind of get access to them, maybe become business partners here, and they're not too happy about doing business, not too interested in doing business with an American, so they kind of snub him off there, and so he kind of gets his revenge later. And as you see the demonstration of him lighting up the light bulbs down in the basement, the guy yells, "The coolant has evaporated! We need to shut this down!" So the coolant was a problem. They needed to get some new cooling patents, which Alexander Grayson, or Dracula, did by apparently murdering this guy. I'm not sure if the show was supposed to make it seem like that this businessman that Dracula killed had then become a vampire, because you see him like laying in this coffin the very next day, and the vampire fighter group, I guess whatever you call them, is that the League of Dragons, or is that somebody else? I don't know. They cut off his head, fill his mouth with garlic, do the whole ritual death to vampire thing on him, so apparently they didn't want to take any precautions there. But Dracula did get his patents on that cooling, so he actually got them from apparently the guy's widow, and they were able to leverage his gambling debts. You have to kind of listen for that in the script. It didn't really show all that happening, but it mentioned it kind of in passing, so you had to kind of listen for that. But anyway, Alexander Grayson, he got his cooling patents, and so he's back in business now. There's a lot of interesting things going on with this show. It seems like there's this whole kind of underground battle between the vampires and the vampires' enemies, and they've been kind of doing this thing for a while, and Dracula makes his appearance. I guess that would explain why he doesn't want to go by Dracula, because he doesn't want his legend to have announced itself that he's in London now, and he kind of wants to remain on the lowdown, if you will, as a vampire, which is understandable, especially since there's these vampire huntsmen abroad, apparently. Not the way it turned out in the Bram Stoker novel, but we'll get to that, I'm sure. So there's that interesting thing. There's Dracula also, who, when he looks at Mina and that party, he suddenly gets a flood of images of his old wife, who apparently had been killed by the League of Dragons. So that is basically something that came right out of the movie Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola in 1992. That's straight out of there. That has nothing to do with the book, so that's that. And of course, the movie called Bram Stoker's Dracula is a far cry from Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. Nobody wants to get the novel right. And again, we'll get to that. A lot to talk about here. Here's the thing. Dracula in this show, and really in just about every movie or adaptation you ever see, he's got this big crush going on with Mina. Mina is kind of torn, and what the show is setting you up for is basically a Team Dracula versus Team Jonathan kind of a thing. That's what it wants us as viewers to kind of get wrapped up into. So there's that. Jonathan Harker, now, he is a journalist in this particular adaptation, which is cool. It's a divergence from the book, but what else is new? So he's a journalist in this particular adaptation, and Dracula wants to kind of get a little bit of publicity. He wants to do a little bit of PR with the London common folk and business people, so he invites Jonathan for an interview to kind of let him know that he's here in town and he's in business. He's in business, he's in the energy industry, and he's not all that bad. He doesn't bite. Oh, but he does. So that's why he wanted to have that interview with Jonathan Harker. You got Mina's friend Lucy, and she, of course, in just about every adaptation is this ditzy, flighty, borderline slutty person who's kind of just attention-seeking and just kind of like that. And so there's Lucy, and she's, of course, one of the main characters in the original novel. Then you got some kind of new characters. You got these business people. It's sort of hard for me to keep track of their names. They're said a few times, but it's sort of hard to keep track of them. You do have Van Helsing. He's Mina's teacher in this particular adaptation. And again, he's apparently doing some kind of deal with the devil. He was the one, you see this later in the episode, who actually revived Dracula, as we pointed out. And apparently not a risk that I would have wanted to have taken. I'm not sure why any human would want to run the risk of doing a deal with a vampire, but apparently Van Helsing thinks he's got things figured out here. So they're doing some kind of deal whereby I'm not sure if Van Helsing is in on the energy industry or what exactly he wants to do. They're both against this whole League of Dragons business, which is actually a historical, verifiable group of people who they were part of the Crusades, and they fought against the Ottoman Turks and all that. So now apparently there's still a League of Dragons, or a Dragon League. I'm not sure if I'm calling it the right thing. League of Dragons, is that what it's called? Apparently that group is still kind of alive and well. They don't wage war as they used to, but now they're kind of this underground shady group of business people, and Dracula's had enough of their corruption and this ongoing feud that he's had with them over the centuries, I suppose. Although it's kind of funny to me if you look at historically, if they are basing this show is basing Dracula upon the historically kind of base of Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, or as he liked to be called, Dracula. That had to do with the name his father was given, so it's kind of like son of Dracula. It's got that kind of ring to it. Anyway, if this adaptation is basing Dracula on that particular character and saying that this is Vlad the Impaler, I think they're kind of messing with history a little bit, because Vlad the Impaler was actually a member of the Order of the League of Dragons, as was his father, so that kind of doesn't make historical sense, but that's what we're dealing with here. So Van Helsing is doing his deal with the devil. Dracula, he's kind of got his crush on Mina going on. He's also kind of got his other romancy, sexual, weird things he's doing, and meanwhile he's biting people and taking their blood and doing all that. His agenda, his dark vampiric agenda, seems to be that he wants to, kind of create this new species of human, or kind of evolution of thing going on, which he alludes to in his interview with Jonathan, which is weird because, I don't know, I always thought that the agenda of the vampire wasn't that broad. It was just, I need to feed, and so here's what I have to do. I never got the impression that it was their grand scheme to turn the whole world into vampires. And if you do, then what? Do you all just bite each other then and drink each other's blood? I mean, that doesn't seem like a good time if you're a vampire. I don't know. I guess in this adaptation, their dream is to turn the whole world into vampires. And there's this other kind of underground group of people who are fighting them. So there's that kind of going on. Meanwhile, there's this whole business aspect with the League of Dragons and their business partners with the oil and gas industry. So it's a little bit complicated. I almost feel like this show is trying to do a little bit too much, where it's hard to follow. So that's kind of my overall impression of it. The ratings did pretty well. It was one of the most highly watched hours on NBC all year, so good for them, I suppose. If you ask me, best part about this show, the soundtrack. I really loved the music. The music to this show was fantastic. However, the editing, I thought, could have been a little bit better, because a lot of times, especially with all these British accents going on, your ear naturally has to strain, if you're an American, has to strain a little bit extra to kind of pick up everything they're saying. It doesn't help when the music is just a little bit too loud and you're trying to strain your ear to hear everything they're saying, and it's just, wait, what was that? You have to rewind the DVR. What? Huh? So stuff is easy to kind of fly over your head when the editing is that bad. But maybe it's all for the best, because like I said, the music really is the best part of this. That's my that's my opinion for you. So to get into where I really get into the beef of this entire adaptation business, and when it comes to Dracula, it's very touchy for me, because I am the biggest fan of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, and I'm not a book person. I really don't like reading books. So if I say I like this book, I really, really like it. So I'm a huge fan of Dracula, and I gotta say, it just kinda shakes my bones when they make these adaptations that are just such a far cry from Bram Stoker's concept of Dracula, from his concept of vampires, and just all his characters, and everything's just kinda thrown here and there for, just a shot at getting ratings. I don't know, it makes me mad. And here's what really grinds my gears, as Peter Griffin would say. You know, there hasn't been a great Dracula movie, really, ever. I mean, there's a few big ones, of course. The 1931 Todd Browning film with Bela Lugosi was fantastic in the sense of the performance that Bela Lugosi put on and his portrayal of Dracula. But for one thing, that movie, you know, in 1931, how much can you really do as far as really getting the effects that you want? And not to mention, the characters are all over the place. Jonathan Harker is like somebody else, Renfield is somebody else, there's Mina, and it's just kind of a mess. There's Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola. That was a huge mess, because you got like Mina and Dracula falling in love, which looks like that's where this show is headed. There just hasn't been a great movie, and, you know, I've heard the argument, it's hard to put something like this on a screen, and I see that, but then it became my idea, why not make a show? A Dracula TV show that follows the book really well, and the book has 27 chapters, so it'd be easy to just kind of compact the show into maybe 24, 25, 26 episodes, and just really do Dracula justice the way it's always supposed to have been. And then I hear, oh, NBC's doing a Dracula show, and my first thought is, oh crap, because I know how these things go. I'm reading about it, and I'm just going, facepalm. I mean, they're at it again. You know, they just keep rehashing the same story where Dracula and Mina have this thing for each other, and the characters are here and there. Everybody's a different person, and it's not the way it's supposed to be. And so if you want to know
what really grinds my gears,
it's the fact that doing the Dracula TV show was my idea. Not that I had the means or the resources to get it done, but it was still my idea. And they stole it and turned it into a steaming pile of dump. I just get on my hobby horse about this, and I know there's always going to be a stickler, that hardcore fan that's upset because they changed one little bitty thing. And, you know, I'm okay with there being some adaptation. Like with Lord of the Rings, even your hardcore Lord of the Rings book fans are pretty happy with the way the movies turned out. They really are. You know, movies like Shutter Island, that did fine by the book, to my understanding. But nobody seems to want to get Dracula right. Nobody seems to want to read the book and just make a movie based on the book, or even remotely, or just take a stab at making good on the book. You know, I'm fine with a few variations, sure. So I don't mean to be all hardcore and all just it's got to be my way or the highway, but it annoys me when it's just such a great story and people have to just keep doing the same old mess ups. And not only that, but you know, if you want to be Stephenie Meyer and crap out a dump like Twilight, well, that's fine, because that's her own dump. But don't make a dump and use Bram Stoker's characters, use his concepts, use his plot lines, but then really distort them. You know, if you want to make your own brand new vampire story, well, go right ahead. You know, the literary world, it's a free world. You can do that. But when you take somebody else's character and parts of their plot lines and their concepts, you just want to mess with them. It really gets to me. Well, I don't want to. Part of me doesn't want to go into the Dracula book because I don't want to give it away. I'm assuming you haven't read it because nobody has, apparently. But then I realize, you know, I'm going to be referencing it so much that I better just run you through a quick synopsis of the entire book. So if you don't like spoiler alerts, then just pause the podcast now, read the book, and then get back to me, because I'm going to run through the story of Dracula, Bram Stoker's 1897 Dracula here real quick as I can. So Dracula's a vampire. He lives in the Carpathian Mountains in Romania. lives is a funny word because as a vampire you're undead. Well, anyway, that's where he dwells, I suppose. He wants to move to England where people are unsuspecting of him. People aren't as superstitious because people pretty much have him figured out in Romania. So he wants to move to where he can prey on unsuspecting souls. So he buys a couple of locations in England. One of them is Carfax Abbey. And so Jonathan Harker, who is a solicitor, comes to Dracula's castle in Romania to facilitate the deal. So he's there. He has no idea that Dracula's a vampire or anything. He just thinks this is a distinguished Count Dracula. He's a distinguished man. Well, anyway, Jonathan Harker's slowly figuring out that he's a prisoner in Dracula's castle. You know, various doors are locked. Dracula doesn't want him to leave. He keeps telling him, stay with me longer. Jonathan's realizing that he's a prisoner, although Dracula never says, I got you, you're my prisoner. So there's a lot of interesting chemistry going on. Dracula ends up leaving eventually for England. He leaves Jonathan in the castle, basically just to die. Jonathan ends up escaping, climbing down the steep castle wall, and then that basically encompasses the first 4 chapters of Dracula, and boy, are those exciting chapters to read. They're very, very cool, and we completely, utterly missed out on those in the show because Dracula in episode 1, he's already in England, so we've already missed one of the greatest, just most exciting parts of the book. Not to mention the journey to England, the whole death ship experience, the captain's log, where everyone is kind of getting picked off the ship slowly but surely, and the captain is left with his hands tied to the wheel of the ship. It's just such an exciting read, that Captain's Log. Completely missed out on that in the show because, again, Dracula's already in England in first couple minutes of the episode. So we missed out on some fantastic literature brought to the screen. So thank you, producers of the show. You ruined that. Anyway, next we meet in the book Lucy and Mina. Mina's already been mentioned in Jonathan Harker's journal because Mina and Jonathan are engaged at that point. Lucy is getting engaged. She keeps writing about these men. Apparently 3 guys proposed to her on the same day, and I bring this up because these 3 guys become main characters in the story. First proposal comes from Dr. John Seward. He's got his, he's a doctor, obviously. He's a caretaker at an insane asylum, which incidentally is very close, just within a stone's throw really of Carfax, where Dracula has purchased his property. Lucy rejects Dr. Seward. Next in line is Quincy Morris. He's an American from Texas. He proposes to Lucy. She rejects him. And next in line is Arthur Holmwood, who is the son of some kind of British nobility. He's rich. He's got property. He's got whatever. So she does marry him. Well, she does get engaged to him. Dracula moves into England and before too long starts preying upon Lucy. Lucy ends up dying after each one of Dr. Seward, Quincy Morris, and Arthur Holmwood, who are the guys who proposed to her. They are there with her. They're trying to donate blood to her to keep her alive. They don't know what's killing her. Dr. Seward calls his mentor, Dr. Abraham Van Helsing from Amsterdam, to come in and see what he knows. Dr. Van Helsing comes to the conclusion that this whole thing is some kind of supernatural curse thing. He pretty much has it figured out pretty quickly, but doesn't reveal it till later. Well, Lucy dies, and she starts apparently as a vampire now, preying upon small children. Van Helsing sees what's going on, and so he gets the guys together and says, we gotta take care of this, here's what's going on, I'm pretty sure we gotta take care of this. And so they liberate Lucy's soul by doing the whole, drive a stake through her heart, cut off her head, whatever was necessary there. So that happens. And then you got this group of protagonists formed against Dracula, and they have this strong bond because they all, were in love with Lucy. They all loved her as a friend. You have Jonathan and Mina, who, were of course good friends of hers, and so you have this just fantastic group of protagonists against Dracula. So they set out to track him down. Their operating base is from Dr. Seward's asylum. Meanwhile, Dracula starts to want to get in on that asylum. He does so by sort of seducing, if you will, an inmate at the asylum, Renfield, who has this lust for power. He likes to eat flies and spiders, thinking he can get their life force from them by eating them, and he has this whole fascination there. Dracula apparently comes to him and promises him more animals, and therefore Renfield lets him in. Dracula sets to work right away on preying upon Mina, which, as you can imagine, doesn't sit very well with our protagonists. So then Dracula is basically figuring out that these guys are against him, and making plans to drive him out. Then Dracula makes Mina drink some of his blood, which apparently binds Mina's mind to Dracula's. And so that whole thing happens. Mina's under this kind of curse for about the rest of the story. Van Helsing tries to cleanse her by putting this Holy Communion wafer on her, which ends up scarring her. That becomes a big turning point in the story. So there's this whole thing going on. Well, anyway, they're starting to track Dracula down. They're purifying his earth boxes, which is where he has to rest during the day. They put the Holy Communion wafer in his boxes. He's got 50 of them total. And so he's starting to be they're starting to shut down his operation, and he realizes, okay, they're onto me. Maybe this whole thing was a bad idea. I better hit the road and get back to my homeland. He takes his last remaining earth box, gets inside of it, ships it back to Romania. They chase him back there, track him down, open up his earth box, and then they kill him. In that final fight against him, their good friend Quincy Morris ends up losing his life. But Mina is released from the curse when Dracula is driven out, and his soul is then released as well. So all's well that ends well. Quincy dies, but Jonathan and Mina named their child after Quincy Morris, so that kind of is a little bit redeeming. And that's essentially your Dracula story. It's pretty simple, not a whole lot of complicated stuff going on, but there are some excellent, excellent conversations in the story. It's very, very well written, very coolly, if that's a good word to use, very coolly written, very well crafted. We have like found footage movies like Paranormal Activity. This is sort of like a found document story. As I read to you in that opening epigraph, all of the writings in the story are first-person narratives from different characters' perspectives. So it's very cool that we're getting a first-person view of the story, but from different characters. So you kind of see everybody's different personalities coming out. You see the way people think coming out. It's very cool, and I highly recommend you read that book. If you're a fan of words, if you're a fan of stories, if you're a fan of books at all, read Dracula. It's just one of the best reads that you'll come across. Very stimulating and engaging conversation. It's also not very esoteric. I mean, the book's over 100 years old, but it's relatively easy reading, I thought. And again, I'm not a book person. So if I tell you I like this book, I really like this book. So that's what I have to say there. Typically I find in these Dracula adaptations, they try and make vampires, they try and romanticize them, make them, focused on a woman, and, you see that really come out in stories like Twilight, but it really kind of drives me up the wall when they try and do that with Dracula, especially when you read the book and you see that, Dracula really has no interest in romance. He's really got no interest. Furthermore, he has no interest in doing any business with energy industry or really, any kind of enterprise there at all. He's resourceful. He's got money. He's sophisticated. He's interested in literature. He's interested in history. He's interested in culture and civilization and languages, but not for, recreation, or not for really any other use than putting them into use to deceive people, or to just kind of draw upon his power, or to, prey upon unsuspecting souls. That's really his drive and motivation in his cursed state there. So that's really what you have. He's not interested in high-class parties. He's not interested in public interviews with journalists. He really wants to kind of stay in the shadows. He wants to blend in, if he's out on the town. He doesn't want to, seem like a freak, although that's the way he does kind of come off in the book a lot. But his desire is to just kind of blend in and just kind of be your average pedestrian. But he's not really interested at all in being in the spotlight or having a lot of, high society classy parties and friends and relationships. That's really not what he's into. He wants to feed on people's blood, and that's what he is. He's a beast. He's a very sophisticated, very smart, very strong beast, but at the end of the day, he doesn't care about romance. He doesn't care about love. He doesn't care about humanity and ethics. He doesn't care about fighting crime and corruption. He doesn't care about better business bureaus or whatever. He's really only focused on one thing, and that's blood. Because the blood is the life, is it not? Hey, if you missed the first episode, this series is on Hulu, so you can keep up with it that way. So check that out. I'm looking forward to seeing some more episodes here, seeing where this thing goes, and as always, comparing it with the good old classic Dracula by Bram Stoker. I'd love to interact with you. If you like this podcast, if you hate it, that wouldn't surprise me. So let me know whatever you think about the show. If you've read Dracula novel, then now we really got to talk. We'll be best friends, right? So, Dracula Podcast at gmail.com. We're also on Twitter at Dracula Podcast and on Facebook, The Dracula Podcast. So a lot of ways to get in touch. I would love to hear your theories about where this show is going to go or what you think they're going to mess up in terms of, Dracula and Bram Stoker, who's, rolling in his grave, I'm sure. So yeah, interact with me, give me a like on Facebook there with the podcast, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or talk to any comments that you may have regarding the show or the podcast. The Dracula Podcast is a production of the Southgate Media Group. I'm Frank Stella. Have a good night.